program will begin shortly. Launch sequence. Activate. Warning, the following content is not politically correct. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the channel today, everyone. I'm Sara Higdon. This is Transform to Freedom, and welcome back. It's been a little bit of a week. It's been an interesting week. So protests continue, and that's kind of where we're going to jump in right now. I had a different story to go before I started the episode, when I was setting up. But we have breaking news, actually. So we're going to break some news here. If you haven't seen yet, so you've been watching quite a bit lately across college campuses these last few weeks. There's been these Gaza camps being set up. There's these pro-Palestinian protesters. And I mean, since October, there's been a widespread of pro-Palestinian protesters, anti-Israel protests. Some of them have been very pro-Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more later. But like I said, right before we went on the air, this was maybe less than 30 minutes ago that this came out. And if you didn't know, like the Met Gala is happening tonight, which is an interesting dynamic, right? So apparently pro-Palestinian protesters rushed the gates at the Met Gala and are facing off with the police outside to protect those typically liberal celebrities that go to the Met Gala. I don't know, pretty sure it's mostly progressives and liberals that go to this event. But I guess, it's Hollywood, so you just never really know. But here's the video. That's a lot of people. Now, obviously, there are no arrests happening, and the police everything is just kind of peaceful so far. But this is a developing story, so there's stuff to watch for tonight. Especially watching on Twitter. But it's an interesting thing to have happen, right? So a lot of these celebrities are usually insulated from a lot of this stuff that they promote, because a lot of times they would be the ones that are promoting these types of causes. And I've said this before, that the Israel Hamas situation, the war between Israel and Hamas, has really divided, has drawn some interesting boundaries and created a lot of strange bedfellows, right? In some sense, you have very socially conservative people coming out on the pro-Palestinian sides, and they would be more what you would consider more the alt-right people, because they're anti-Jewish, they're anti-Semitic. There's a lot of anti-Semitic people that are in the very extremes of the right wing. There's also, and then you have the very anti-Semitic factions of the left that come from the very far left that plays to this extreme position on that side, which also is very anti-Semitic. And then you have a lot of people kind of caught in the middle, like me, who doesn't believe we should be funding Israel. And I've said this for years, to be honest. You can go back to a lot of my speeches well before October 7th happened. But I have a lot of Jewish friends in my life, and I have Jewish people, and it's interesting talking to people who are even more pro-Zionist, but that are in my life, and seeing like their takes on what this is. I'm not gonna disclose like what people have told me, you know, or anything like that. But it's just interesting hearing different takes. But at the end of the day, I still would I don't think that the United States should be funding Israel. And I think when Israel started losing the media battle, when innocent lives were being taken, when they were killing innocent people, when their military started killing innocent people. But at the same time, I'm not really on the side of these protesters, because again, they are more the extreme protest. But as we talked about last week, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about this later, I am still on the side of free speech, and free protest, and the fact that I do believe that hate speech is free speech. And so I think, and again, we're gonna dive more into this later, but I think that a lot of these protests have gone beyond the boundaries of free speech at this point, because they've taking over buildings, doing all this stuff, and blocking people from going to class, and impeding the movements of other people. That's not speech. That's interfering with other people's lives. Speech is not violence, but once you actually start impeding other people, then it becomes an issue. I'm sorry. You probably didn't hear that. I think one of my dogs dropped a bone on the floor, which is right above me. So, but it really is an interesting dynamic, because there's a lot of Zionist on the left, and there's a lot of Zionist on the right. There's a lot of anti-Israel on the left. There's a lot of anti-Israel on the right. So the ideological lines are not so clearly drawn in this. And I do believe that most people that would say that they're anti-Zionist on the right, or they're are really using that term to say that they don't support funding Israel. I don't, and most of them, if not all of them, don't believe in funding any other foreign government, especially militarily. Which is where I would stand. I don't believe in sending our money, especially to affluent nations that don't need our money, but the money that they take from you, they steal from you, they are sending overseas, and I don't agree with that. But developing situations. So, but I mean, obviously, you can go get a lot of your news on Twitter, because it's popping up, and I know, yeah. So go watch that. If you've noticed, I decided to wear some of my XXXY Jennifer Say's organization. Now, I will put the same disclaimer out that I put out on Instagram, that I am not being paid. I'm not involved with the organization at all. I just appreciate the organization and Jennifer's message, And so I like to support people who I agree with and who I and support people that are doing good things. And since I know people and since I agree with the message that they're putting out, we may have some disagreements. I don't know, but since this is an organization that I think is doing good work, I will support them. And that's what I'm doing here and promoting it to you. And if you haven't, if you don't know, they are an organization that is, you know, tackling. They're speaking out for. They're speaking out for female sports and keeping males out of female sports. And if you followed my content for any period of time, you would know that I am against male athletes competing in female sports. There is no, and again, I've been on hormones for what now, 5 years. There is no period of time that you can be on hormones and lose the biological advantages of being male. I used to say that there was no period of time to erase the biological advantages of being male if you went through male puberty, and then we didn't know how long, what the ratio was of male puberty to how long it would take to be on hormones. But as you start to dive deeper into it, you understand that the skeleton doesn't change. The angles of the hips, the angles of your legs, of male and female's legs, are all designed to give males athletic advantages. So I don't agree with that, and I agree with, and I think that males should stay out of female sports. It's a pretty simple concept. I think we talked about Title IX last week. The concept is the males. Title IX was initially put in place to protect and give equal opportunity through scholarships for females, right? And so to give those scholarships and those opportunities to males is kind of an affront to Title IX. But somehow, and it's there. This is where I think you lose a lot of people. I think you lose a lot of acceptance when you're trying to force males and female sports. And I will say here, we have a clear example of this weekend in the NCAA's. This was going to be the first story, but this needs to stop. So a trans athlete won 2 NCAA track races this weekend, yet would have been dead last in the male category by 2 seconds. And if you know, in racing, any type of racing, 1 second is a huge margin. So 2 seconds would have been in last place by 2 seconds is a huge deal. Now, this what's this person's name? Sadie Schreiner of the Rochester Institute of Technology won the 400 with a time of 55.07 and the 200 meter with a 21.14 at the Liberty League Outdoor Track Championships. Ironic naming that the Liberty Outdoor Track Championship, that it being there, which is it's a league in the NCAA Division III, right? Now, if I'm not mistaken, I'm just going off memory here, which I do have a good memory. If I'm not mistaken, Sadie was the same person who forfeit last year, so didn't actually show up to the high school championships because of the outrage and protest, but still received a scholarship to compete in college, to then go and take first place in college and just prove why males don't belong in female sports. So Well, welcome in. Thank you for joining. I'm excited you could catch me live too. I'm glad you can come in. You can hang out. We can chat a little bit. You guys can tell me what you think. We can read some of y'all's messages. SRN. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll talk to Jessica about doing some collaborative stuff on sports. I have some other stuff that I've working in the works on some of the other sports stuff. If you guys know, I'm not gonna put that out there yet. But so here is the video um of the championship. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's a huge win, but it's a huge difference. Now, look, there was a question that was brought up on Twitter after this issue was raised, right? What I'll say is, yeah, Ronnie, you're right. So some girl lost a spot in this race. A female lost a spot in this race, and that's kind of the point. You don't need to be trans people don't need to be the top. But if they're competing in female sports, they're taking a spot away from a female athlete. But this is where so this question was raised, right? Talking about why so many people don't go, like, are not against this. Now, a lot, again, we talked about this all the way back when Leah Thomas was going through when all the stuff was happening with Leah Thomas. A lot of these female athletes, if they step out, they could lose their scholarships, right? They are going to school on scholarship, and if they protest these things, like, so if they don't run, they could lose their scholarship, meaning that they could lose a bunch of money that maybe they need for school. Which thankfully, I mean, people like Riley Gaines and Seth Dillon from the Babylon Bee, they have vowed to help with expenses for people who do step out. Like we saw the young, so I think we talked about it on here. I believe we talked about it. But there was five young middle schoolers who stepped out and decided not to compete in the shot put a couple weeks ago. And instead of punishing instead of removing the male athlete who was competing, they tried to punish the 5 girls that protested. Thankfully, the court said, no, you can't do that. You can't suspend them from their races. So they put an injunction on that as well. So those, but everybody kind of stepped up to support those young girls for standing out. And that's really what's going to change this. You got to step up and stand out and just refuse to participate in a lot of these situations. But again, these girls in college, especially, they're on scholarship. They have a lot to lose by stepping up and stepping out. So you have to support them and support, you have to support making those changes and hope and hope maybe they do the brave thing and step out. But I don't blame them for not, because again, like I said, they have a lot to lose. But so the question was raised though about, sorry, the question was raised. So I kind of pointed out on Twitter when this was talked about, like, there is a drop in performance when you've been on when you've reduced your testosterone and you've been on estrogen for a certain period of time. There is a drop in performance. There is no lie about that. I don't think anybody can deny that you drop in performance by stopping testosterone. But the issue is that you never erase that advantage. I've talked about my advantages plenty of times, and I'm nursing a hamstring injury, so my my record-breaking feat on squats is kind of put on hold right now. But I would have, like, after like 3 or 4 months, I would have won the competitions of doing squats, and I've been on hormones again for 5 years. So there is no way to erase that biological advantage, and like people like Leah Thomas I always use as the prime example, and the reason is because Leah Thomas, the difference between male and female elite swimmers is about 11% difference. Leah Thomas only lost 2.3% of performance from the male times to the female times. Like, if there was which is why Leah went from like number 500 in the male category to number 1 in the females category, because there wasn't the drop in performance that you would and there wasn't, if Leah had dropped 11% in performance, then you would be like, okay, there's no, you are able to erase that biological advantage, but it just doesn't happen. There is no way to a 2.3% drop in performance isn't enough. And I just saw something. Actually, I got it pulled up over here on my other screen. And I didn't read down into this, but let me see if I can present this actually. So, which is interesting. This was right on the top of Substack. So, from it really doesn't say much. So it just says from loser to winner, and I didn't read it completely. But the thing is, I don't know what the difference in performance drop was for Sadie or anything like that. But it still doesn't matter. Like, you went from a mediocre male athlete to taking female spots on their college teams. Thankfully, and that's what's really interesting about like the running and stuff is World Athletic has banned trans athletes. Swimming, the Olympics, I believe the IOC even has banned Leah Thomas from competing in the Olympics, which are all good things. Like, nobody's banning trans people from competing. They're simply banning them from competing in female sports. Like, if you there's been a lot of discussion. It's like, if you want trans people to compete in female sports, then you should be okay with allowing female athletes to also juice, right? So to take like, why even worry about performance enhancing drugs when these male athletes were on performance enhancing drugs like their whole lives, which is testosterone. Yeah, this is a good question, Ronnie. They also took away sport records, possibly in perpetuity. Will a woman ever be able to break those records? That's a good question. I believe that all of those records should have asterisks next to them, and they need to keep the record. They need to check, and when anybody breaks the last female record, that's what should be. Those records need to be kept, but are they? Like, are the female? Because this insanity will blow over. Okay, this insanity is not going to stick around forever. I think we're seeing the shift from the trans insanity to now the Islam insanity, where in these protests on campuses, we're now seeing students converting to Islam, which is an interesting dynamic. I don't necessarily know if they know exactly what they're converting into, but that's what they're doing. So it really could be the next step in the evolution is supporting the next thing is supporting Islam, and trans could be on its way out. That would be great. That means that most of us could just go back to living our lives in peace, not worrying about this conversation of male and female athletes, because there won't be any males in female sports. Like, there won't be so much news on it, and there won't be so much activism behind it, so that way we can actually like get the organizations to like ban this stuff. I mean, come on. But yeah, and speaking of the trans insanity that's happening, we did the transanity hour, or the transanity section of this episode first today, because Austin, Texas, moves to become a sanctuary city for minors seeking sex changes in the state. So I had so like, if you guys remember, I had Carrie Smith on this show. I know she was out there. She spoke against this, as well as some other people in the area, some that don't necessarily like me too much, but that's here nor there. But this is basically saying Austin is not going to. So anytime you see sanctuary city, sanctuary state, these types of things, it just means that that city is not going to use any of their resources to enforce your ban. So I don't know how it works in this case. To me, this just seems like a virtue signal from Austin. It's not like they can actually stop this. So state of Texas has banned minors from receiving cross-sex hormone surgeries and the like. Austin said they are not going to enforce that ban in their city. So they're basically not going to use police officers to issue fines or anything like that. City police officers. This does absolutely nothing, though. There's no doctors that's going to say, "Oh, I'm going to go against my state law because I don't think that the city is going to prosecute me." Because the state can still prosecute you. There is state police, right? So if you have state police that, I don't know about like Austin, but like you have like, well, I know you have like the Texas Rangers and stuff like that, but I mean, I know in the city of Atlanta, there's a lot of Georgia State Police down here, right? And that's the way it is in most cities. There's kind of a mix between state cops and city cops. State cops will still enforce this. So, and not even that, state cops will still enforce this. And then if a child sues you, if a child sues the doctor, it goes to state court, and your lawsuit's there. So, like I said, I think it's just a virtue signal bill. One of my friends that's in Austin told me they do this for everything. They've done this for abortion, like they made it a sanctuary city for abortion and all these other things. But it's like, no doctor is going to provide that shit there. Nobody's going to do this. It's not the same as saying like a state passing or legalizing, marijuana, or a state, what is it? So, or a state, or having a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants. It's not the same, because marijuana, well, one, it's a 10th Amendment issue. It's the it would be the ATF. It would be the ATF, right? that would come in. So it would be the FBI or the ATF or federal agents that would come in for marijuana. Again, with sanctuary cities, it would be the same thing. It would be federal agents with ICE or Customs and Border Protection, or that would come in that would come in and enforce those laws if a sanctuary city was not using any of their local police force to do it. So it's much bigger. It would be a much broader scale, and it would be harder for the federal government to enforce sanctuary city laws because they just don't have the manpower. Whereas this would be these cities, like a city like Austin, is going against their state government, not the federal government. So I think it's just a virtue signal bill, but it just shows you like how detestable some of these people are. They think it's okay for kids to make life-altering elective surgeries, even as countries around the world are going away from it. So that's it. Another big one that's kind of been in the news quite a while, and this is finally, I'm thankful for this one. This last weekend, there were 6 squatters detained in an Atlanta suburb after allegedly stealing a neighbor's car. I mean, so how dumb do you have to be squatting on a property and then go steal one of your neighbor's cars and drive it back to the property that you're squatting on? Not very bright, but that's what kind of happened here. And this has been a big issue. I mean, we've talked about like places like New York and other cities around the country. Like they have these laws that are like squatter rights laws. So squatters, it's almost impossible for landlords or even just homeowners, property owners, to come and like kick people off their property that don't belong there, that were never allowed to be there. It's like breaking and entering. Doesn't apply to squatting. It's really weird. Like we saw a woman in New York get arrested after she tried to have people removed from her home in New York City. And this is one of those things, is when it hit New York, it was really interesting because I know I've written at least 3 articles in the last couple of years, or in the last year that I've worked at the Post Millennial, about Atlanta. And I know that talking to people around here, squatting was a huge issue around here. And because it became such a big national news story, it became a hot button topic. And so like in Florida, Ron DeSantis passed a law quickly to ban it in his state. And what led to this arrest was back on April 24th, Brian Kemp signed a law that would speed things along to get people removed from property and homes here in Georgia. So which is great news, because this was kind of the first time that it's been used. And apparently like where this happened, it's in South Fulton. And so it's kind of a suburb of Atlanta. But apparently like 18 homes in this neighborhood had been taken over by squatters after homeowners, I guess what they did is they were selling them to these corporations, and then they just move out, and then they'd never pay the property back, and then squatters would end up moving in. So I guess these squatters moved in like on Christmas Day, which is crazy in and of itself. But we see like people, like they leave for vacation and then they come back and their house is occupied by somebody else, and then it takes months, if not years, to get these people removed from their house. So this is good news. Glad to see this is happening. That private property owners are actually getting their property back and getting their rights back to their property, especially in my state, because that's an issue. It's a violation of private property rights. And yeah. Well, let's talk about another big news story this week. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signs legislation to ban lab-grown meat in Florida. Now look, you don't want to eat lab-grown meat, don't eat lab-grown meat. You don't want to eat crickets, don't eat crickets. Don't eat the bugs. That's fine. But at the end of the day, banning a new innovative product like this is anti-free market, it's anti-capitalistic, and it's anti-everything that Republicans are supposed to stand for. Now, I get why Ron DeSantis thinks that he, wants to do why he did this. I get it, because he thinks that the lab-grown meat is going to take over. It's kind of like this is like the next step in the agenda of the World Economic Forum, right? This is kind of what the woke are pushing for. I understand where it's coming from. But at the end of the day, like, you have to let the free market work. I'm not for this. Now, I don't know. I doubt. I don't think that I would ever eat this. We would see. I might try it. Might try it to see just what it tastes like. But we don't know. And you start to think about this, and part of this comes from the fact that there is quite the cattle product, producers in Florida. I'm sure the cattle lobby is helping with his politics and helped with his campaign, and so he doesn't want to go against them. He wants to protect ranchers who are generally more conservative, backwoods country boys that are generally more conservative. So he's trying to protect that. But this isn't the right way to go about it, I think. So what's interesting is people are so worried about lab-grown meat. They're so worried about, again, the bugs and all this stuff. But like the vegans and stuff, they've tried this. They've tried this with the Beyond Meats. Has anybody looked to see how Beyond Meat and like these vegan alternatives to beef has gone? They're not doing well. They're not doing well at all. The market has rejected them. I think this actually, yeah, you're right, Ronnie. You think this lab-grown meat will be appealing to vegetarians, not meat eaters. I think you're right. I think this could be an option, because one of the reasons why vegetarians don't like meat is because of the way that the cattle is treated. And this is one of the things. They're like, oh, we're not, this is somebody showed like the machine that makes this type of stuff. And you look at it and you go, well, have you ever seen what a cattle farm, like a mass, like a big agriculture slaughterhouse looks like? It's not the most humane, operations going on there. So would this be better than what we have going on? Possibly. I think the best way to do it, I mean, personally, I support getting meat from your local butcher and your local farmers market, where the ranchers, buying full cows or half cows and stuff like that. I was actually just looking at I was just looking at some hunting property, so I could start deer hunting again, because venison is delicious meat. But it's again, wild deer is better than this. And getting it from like a cattle farmer or a rancher in Wyoming, or one of those places, those are much better than buying the meat at your grocery store. The meat at your grocery store comes from these very inhumane places. And now I'm not saying anything like politically about this stuff, because I eat the stuff from the grocery store. But if you're worried about that, if you're worried about where this meat is coming from and how it's being made, you might want to look deeper into your grocery store. And again, if it doesn't work, it doesn't survive. Like if the people reject it, the people reject it. But the market can decide. It's the same thing. Okay, with the with the jab. It should have always been, you get to decide. We should always have a choice in these matters. We don't need big government here to try to protect us from these things. We don't. And I was making this point, I guess this is going to be the last point I make on this, is like, this stifles innovation. So the free market encourages innovation. This is a new innovative product that they're cutting off at the knees, which it could be a good product. We don't know. They're not going to give it a chance. But think about what would have happened if the horse and buggy industry had won their fight against the internal combustion engine. Now, a lot of people are saying they don't know if this is safe. I think we need to do tests to make sure it's safe, but they didn't know if the internal combustion engine was going to be safe either. You need to test it. You need to run it through its paces, and then you need to see if the free market's willing to take those risks with it. As long as it's labeled properly. But like, the horse and buggy industry, if you look at history, the horse and buggy industry lobbied hard against cars. They were fully against it. Why? Because they knew that they were going to go out of business if this took off, or they would have to adapt and start, producing cars instead of producing buggies, putting engines on cars. But then what do you do with the horses? It's a choice that you have to make, and this stifles innovation. Even if this isn't the best way to do it, the market will provide, and the market will figure out whether this is good or bad. So I don't agree with this move. I don't agree with this at all. I think it is more about just banning woke stuff in the state rather than following actual principles of free market capitalism. This is not free market capitalism. This is just this is government overreach. So there's that. Another bit of government overreach is what we were talking about earlier. We talked a little bit about this last week, talking about hate speech versus free speech. Well, the House of Representatives, they passed a law which was supposedly to define anti-Semitism to make it hate speech. And it was for the Department of Education to enforce these hate speech laws. Again, it's really interesting and it doesn't do anything for it actually pushes your cause in the opposite direction when you try to stifle people's speech. But the same people who would tell you that speech is, most of these people that voted yes on this would have told you in the past that speech is or free speech is to protect speech that you disagree with, that makes you uncomfortable. It makes no sense to protect speech that that people generally agree with. And these same people have been saying this for years, and now they're voting on hate speech legislation and voting yes in the Republican-led House of Representatives. How does this work? Which is really interesting. Because part of me thinks, and this is where we'll put on our tinfoil hats for a little bit this episode. I mean, there's a small part of me that thinks that this was all these protests and everything like that was completely orchestrated by people to get Republicans to go along with it, because this is one area where they are tied to the issue and they don't like it. So they're tied to the position, they have been for years, that if you criticize Israel, then you are somehow anti-Semitic. They can't, they're not like most people, like their arguments they're not like most people who think that you can separate the people and the religion from a government. That's like saying, like, if somebody in another country criticizes the U.S. government for, let's say, going, into Iraq, then they're somehow, well, we're not like we don't have a religious nation behind us, but they would be anti whatever, like, and they would be completely anti hating all American people, which just isn't the case. Why would you hate? I mean, it's literally the same argument that, like, their argument about Israel is the same argument that Osama bin Laden actually used in his manifesto to attack on 9/11. It was wrong when bin Laden did it, and it's wrong when they do it. Okay, it's this notion that, you vote for the government, you vote for the government, and so you're all guilty, and so you're all part of that government. But that's a collectivist mindset. That is not a individual mindset. I didn't vote for anybody who voted for this, and I'm glad none of my representatives did. So I'm happy about that. But how can you say that, free speech is okay except for in this one circumstance? Now, this is a wildly unconstitutional law, and it's probably going to get struck down anyways, but it's really indicative of where we are. And Mike Johnson just continues to hand everything over to the Democrats. And like I said before, I was against removing him as speaker, but I think there's been multiple things in the last couple weeks that I just said, you got to remove him you got to remove him at this point. I'm with Thomas Massey and on this one, so I agree there. Here's one. I didn't even know this was happening. So apparently, the RNC and Donald Trump filed a lawsuit in Nevada to prevent late ballots to protect election integrity. So apparently in Nevada, they accept ballots 3 days after the election as long as they were post-dated by the election day. Seems a little fishy to me. And then they were saying they were actually accepting ballots if they were received 3 days later, even if they had the post date was unreadable. So this is an issue because how are you going to have an election and then 3 days later you're still able to accept ballots? Seems like that would be very easy for somebody to say, okay, I need this many ballots. We're going to now receive them in the mail today in order for this candidate to win. Seems fishy. And so they're suing to prevent this from happening. So we'll see what happens there. Interesting phenomena. I didn't know that was going on. And yeah. Other big news from this weekend. Okay, so you remember when the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago and seized all these, classified documents? Well, special counsel Jack Smith admitted that the evidence there was, quote unquote, tampered with. I would think that would mean that this lawsuit would be thrown out, right? I mean, the moment, like, you tamper with evidence is I mean, once you tamper with evidence, how do you know that somebody didn't put something in there that wasn't there before? How do you know somebody didn't take something out to protect somebody? How do you prosecute this case? Because all of those documents should be thrown out because there is no way of knowing what was there when they actually found it. Because they mess with it. And so actually Donald Trump is now calling for Jack Smith to be arrested on this. And I'm assuming it's because he they lied to the court, right? So they lied under oath, because it said, okay, so Smith's prosecution office admitting that the documents in boxes found at Mar-a-Lago and the FBI raid were found with documents out of order, indicating the evidence was handled improperly. There are some boxes where the order of items within that box is not the same as it is as in associated scans. They wrote in court documents. The government acknowledged that this is inconsistent with what government counsel previously understood and represented to the court. Okay, so I'm not a law expert here. I don't think that would necessarily would constitute perjury, because you have to knowingly commit perjury, but they misrepresented it to the court in the first time. So you could, if you had evidence that they purposely lied to the court previously, that would be perjury, right? I would think so. So we'll see what happens here. But I would think that, this gets thrown out, or it should. Because how do you know? How do you trust? You think the FBI is? I mean, this just shows you can't trust the FBI. They're gonna do whatever it takes. I mean, the federal government's gonna do what they can to lock Trump up. But at the end of the day, now that this has come out, how do you trust these people? It's lie after lie after lie after lie. The government, that's all they do is lie. All right. So going back to Israel, though, interesting turn of events this last weekend. So the Biden administration puts a hold on approved shipments to Israel, which means that the Biden administration is basically holding any ammo and weapons and all that stuff to go to Israel. Now, this is something that's kind of been like it's been in the months. It was in April, so last month, the Democratic representatives were signing letters to the president calling for an end or for a halt to it, calling it unjustifiable to approve weapons transfers to Israel after an Israeli airstrike inadvertently killed several humanitarian workers. So, because of the way that Israel's acting, because they've indiscriminately, they've more or less indiscriminately killed people instead of, targeted attacks on Hamas. Now they're calling for an end to this. They're calling for us to not fund them, which is interesting because they're still pushing for Ukraine funding, and it's not based on principle. It's based on polls. Joe Biden's losing in the polls. He's losing among young people, and he knows that he will not. The people that are out protesting will not vote for him. What's interesting about these protests is most of them are not students at these campuses. Most of them are paid activists. As they've escalated, they go into different areas, or they go into buildings and all this stuff, and they when they get arrested, then you start to learn that they are paid activists. They're not students on the campus. And what's really sad is the students on these campuses. So Columbia University just apparently suspended their mass graduation. Now they're just going to have individual school graduations. And so you kind of start to feel for these kids, right? Because of it's again 4 years ago. Think about what happened 4 years ago. A lot of these same kids that are graduating this year, so if they graduated college in 4 years, a lot of these same kids are losing out on graduation, are the same kids who lost out on graduation in 2020 due to COVID. So they didn't get their high school graduation, they didn't get their college graduation because of this. At what point, and I think this is a key point, is I think this is why you're seeing so many youth moving more conservative. Like Ronnie, you said it a little bit earlier. You're absolutely right. The pendulum is swinging back. It's swinging back to the right. I think what we're seeing is a lot of these young people are getting fed up. They're waking up to realize like this woke left is just making life harder for them, not easier. And so maybe the people on the right, and when you start to open your eyes to what's going on and how people actually think on the right, and not what the media wants to portray, and not what activists want to portray people to the right. Most people on the right, of course, there's fringe elements on both sides, and most of us who think like this just spend too much time online. Because when you get out in the real world, nobody actually thinks like this. But when you start to see like this stuff, these are vocal minorities that are taking over the narratives, and they're shutting down college campuses. And like I said, most of these people don't even go to these schools, but they're shutting it down. They're shutting down now. They're not even going to graduate because of this. So it's really, really interesting. But there are some people that are schools. And now if you want to hear, like, again, we talked about it before. We talked about free speech and hate speech being different things, or being, hate speech is free speech. We talked about that earlier. We talked about it last week. But this week, we've seen it cross that line. Again, the line that we talked about last week was when it comes to violence, when it comes to stopping movement, when it comes to harassing other students, especially when it comes to harassing Jewish students on campus, or anybody who's, they deem to be Jewish. And there's a line to where that breaks the law. That goes beyond free speech. It's not even just hate speech. It goes beyond, and it's usually when you interfere with other people's lives, and where they're in their them trying to get to class, trying to prevent them from moving about freely, everything like that. And now we have protesters, activists on the George Washington University campus caught on an Instagram Live advocating for the guillotine for their president and provost, and which is at the university. So here we go.
The people find you guilty. Guillotine, 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 guillotine. Bracy, we see you. Bracy, we see you. You assault students too. Up to the motherfucking gallows with you. Get out. The Board of Trustees, on the charges of having a vested interest in the genocide of Palestinian people as they profit off of Zionist weapons and purchases that refuse to divest from apartheid as they line their pockets. The people find you guilty to the guillotine. Board of Trustees, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide.
All right. So this goes beyond. I mean, this is. I don't think that this is breaking the law, so we're not gonna say this. But this is calling for violence. This is calling for an uprising and the murder of their faculty. Now, a little history lesson, and this is how you know that this is a communist movement. This is why we saw. And I've talked about this before. A lot of this stuff even started happening. I've talked about during the Antifa riots of 2020. Remember when they set up in the autonomous zone in Portland, and they were like using, actually they used a guillotine outside of like to protest. That's what became like their symbol in 2020. And the reason is that they're lauding over the French Revolution. Because what happens in a communist revolutionary movement is, and this is when a lot of these activists know this, but the communists don't believe in a state either. They are anti-government. At least in Marxism part 2 would be they would be into it would be an anti-government sentiment. So you basically, the difference between anarchy and communism is anarchy is based on the individual supporting themselves and then voluntarily helping their community, whereas in communism, you have absence of a state, but everybody works together for the common good automatically, which is kind of goes against human nature. Obviously, the fatal flaw with communism is when one person doesn't pull their weight, then you need an authoritarian to come in and force everybody to pull their weight. So it doesn't really work like that. But to get to that point, they know a lot of these the activists, they know, and most of them are let's be real, a lot of them are useful idiots, and they don't understand what they're actually saying, and they just want to be part of a cause because they have no purpose in life, so they want to be part of a cause. But the reason why the guillotine is significant in these situations is because of the French Revolution. So they know that once you get to what I call Stalinism, once you get to basically Stalinism, where everybody is under the thumb of the government. Think of George Orwell's 1984. So everybody is that deep into the government, and everybody, if you're not willing to work for the greater good of society and you want freedom, you either get sent to the gulags or the re-education camps, right? So they send you to the re-education camps, or they kill you because they can't re-educate you. So once you get everybody into a society to where they are where they are all willing to work for the common good, then the government's supposed to dissolve, right? So there is no need for a government. So they're supposed to dissolve. But nobody in a power of government is going to ever give that up. The human nature is to never give up your power in those situations. I mean, a dictator is not going to give up the power that he has. And so the revolutionaries know that the next step is to take out the politicians and those in the oppressive, and who has now become the oppressor and the government oppressive class. And so that's just a brief history about the guillotine and why it is so significant, and how these are not just the movements that not just like a pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. It's not just anti-Israel stuff. This is pro-communism protest. So yeah, Courtney, you're right. Stalinism all the world has ever seen, because you can't get, nobody in the right mind is going to give up power. And it takes a violent revolution to end that power. And then once you get past that, it's like, but see, this is the thing. Even Mao knew this. So what most people don't realize is Mao knew what the end state of communism was. He raised his Red Army to be agitators, like we're seeing right now. He raised the Red Army to see the disruption and everything like that, like we see right now. That's what the Red Army was supposed to do. But once they got to a point where, most people were, they got to a point where the Red Army understood the end state. And so they started to move more into against Mao because they were like, hey, now you got to start giving up your power. And so instead, they were Mao raised them basically to do what they did, cause agitation. But once that agitation starts going against the state, Mao genocided the entire Red Army. Once the useful agitators are no longer needed, the government will, the Stalinists, the Maos, they will then destroy their army, the people that they raised to give them power. Because they know that if they don't do that, then the army will turn on them and destroy them. So there's a lot of death and destruction with communism. But when you see these agitators, most of them, again, like I said, are useful idiots because they don't understand that Mao turned on the Red Army. And it would happen to them if their leaders were in power, if they ever got to the point where they were controlling things. Their leaders would then turn on them because they're no longer useful anymore, and they're only trained for one thing, and that's to agitate. And a trained agitator is not good for a communist state when you get into that communist state. So this is where you know that these people don't understand their history, or they do, and they think that they're going to be part of the elites when it comes. So as usual, running a little bit long tonight. Let me see. I think now I do want to play this one real quick. And on top of all this, the Democrats are understanding that this isn't good for them. Like, I've kind of been sitting back and wondering, like, this happens, like these types of things happen generally in election years. It's riot season, right? So election every 4 years, riot season happens. We saw it in 2020, which in 2020, that was like them saying that Donald Trump controlled the riots, and that was like, riots are bad for the person in charge. But we've seen this throughout our history when people that with people that the far left like in power, they still do this. And so now, like, the View are even like, wait a sec, like, they're seeing that their poll numbers are like going down. They're like, this will actually help Trump. They know that a lot of these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, like these Gaza protests they're not happy with Joe Biden because they see it in the poll numbers. And now they're seeing now the View is seeing that people are seeing these riots, and they're gonna say Joe Biden's isn't taking care of this. So but it's really interesting because they're now worried that it's going to distract from January 6th. They think that January 6th was their win. They could use that to get that win, push back against Donald Trump. And most people would see the images of January 6th and use that as motivation to vote against Donald Trump because they don't want that person running in power. But now they're seeing these people that are generally would-be Democrats protesting and rioting and doing all this stuff and taking over buildings and going beyond free speech, like taking over buildings, destroying property, calling for guillotines and all that stuff. That's not free speech. But here is what happened on The View.
The optics of chaos and lack of control are problematic. One of the people with this event said donors are flocking to this event due to the horror of nightly images they see on TV. So I do think they should be taking note of money has been a problem for Donald Trump. He can't pay his legal fees. Donors were running away.
Do they not remember the visuals on January 6th? Do they not remember those visuals?
I think visuals in the human, literally humans look at the recent visions. So
she's
nightly
so
image right now matters more to them than January 6th.
Is ingrained
Sunny
in my
Hoskins
memory,
is
and it
so
should be ingrained in every single person's memory in the United States of America.
It should be, but well,
You could tell like she's
a lot
honestly
of the imagery looked similar, and it was you know, you're going to see Republicans seeing windows being smashed, things being defaced on college campuses, and it evokes that same sense
and
of
the
loss.
president had to speak to it.
You know, can I
And it
just
was
say
wise of Biden to get out and give us.
somebody's behind that with money. I'm sorry. Who bought those tents, for example?
George
Oh, I
Soros is
definitely- there's
behind
actually
it. Your
powers
people are
to be
behind
right
that, Joy.
that are
Your people are behind that. We already know this. We know who's behind this. We know that a lot of leftists are funding this stuff. It's mostly leftist causes. And actually, there was a story out that I put out this weekend with the Post Millennial that we talked about the who's funding it. It's and how the activists have been planning this for a very long time, and they got with other organizations. And actually at Columbia, they got with like the former Black Panthers to help train them how to, set this stuff up and how to create how to keep like internal drama inside and all this other stuff, how to maintain order within these camps. That's what they were doing. We know that, Joy. But it's really interesting. I mean, like Sunny Hoskins is she's acting very elitist here. And the reason I say that is the way that she says this. Do they not remember January 6th? And almost like they're so close-minded that they forgot. Like they forgot. Are you kidding me? That's the worst thing that's ever happened in this country. How do they not see it? That's what I get from that. I think that she's dumbfounded because people don't think like her. That's it. Yeah. But I mean, it's so funny because people are flocking to then go. One of the donors said a lot of people are flocking to donate to Donald Trump because they're seeing this happen. And a lot of people are seeing riots again. There's like, though, if the 2020 riots didn't invoke people to go out and vote for Donald Trump, I don't know how much this really is. I think this is a different story. We do see we see a lot of Democrats now coming out and saying that they're going to vote for Trump. Even Michael Rappaport's the big one that we've talked about on this show. Because of he said it's getting crazy out here and he's not supporting Joe Biden. A lot of people they're not supporting Joe Biden because they don't think that Biden's doing the job that they thought he was going to do. So, well, all right. Thank you all for joining tonight. As always, I definitely appreciate it. Again, we went a little bit over, but that's okay. It's always okay. I appreciate y'all joining. Remember, if you haven't already, click that like, subscribe button below. Follow me across all social media platforms, and I will see you next time.